Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book, Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
Thom Hartmann.
Well, happy Thursday. Thom Hartmann here with you. Now we're up to 3 media figures who are talking about the very real possibility that we are looking at, not the possibility or the probability or the future event of the end of a democratic republic, but literally it's here. It's here right now. The question is whether we can pull back from it. I mentioned Bill Maher yesterday. I've been talking about this for, 3 years with increasing alarm. And last night, Rachel Maddow went there. This is amazing stuff. I beg your pardon?
Don Lemon did too.
Oh, Don Lemon did too, Sean says. I didn't catch CNN. So I wanted to revisit this extraordinary story. I've shared this with you before because I've been, on this hobby horse for a long, long time. Those of you who, have read Prophet's Way or, my autobiography, or who have, listened to the show for years and years know that, back in 1978, I met a guy in Germany, a German fellow who had started an international charity. And in fact, he started it after World War II for orphans and homeless people in Germany as the country was being ravaged by cholera epidemics in the wave of World War II. It was just shattered. He had been a prisoner of war. He was a member of Hitler's army. And he had been parachuted into Iran and was arrested there early on in the war. And he says, thank God I never had to shoot at anybody. I never had to kill anybody. He was kept in prison until after the war was over. But he had been a Nazi. He had been a part of Hitler's army. He got swept up in this whole thing. And he died in his 90s back a little more than a decade ago, as I recall. But he was my mentor in many ways. His name was Gottfried Mueller. And I spent an enormous amount of time with him. Louise and I moved to Germany for a year to hang out with him and do the work that he was doing. We set up programs all over the world for, from hospitals to schools to communities for abused kids to all kinds of stuff. And I think I have a pretty good, and through this work, by the way, he had a guy who worked for him, Horst von Heyer, who has also passed away now, who was a member of the Hitler Youth. And, we used to, we'd sit and drink a bottle of wine and have these long talks into the evening about how did Hitler do this? I mean, von Heyer was at the Nuremberg rally. He was one of those people that you see in Leni Riefenstahl's movie, Power of the Will.
Triumph.
I beg your pardon?
Triumph of the Will.
Triumph of the Will. Thank you, Nate. And so I can tell you my own stories from this, and I have over the years. And in fact, there's a chapter in Prophet's Way called Where is a Hitler for Peace, in which I was talking with Herr Mueller, and he said, this guy, Adolf Hitler, went from having 3 supporters and no money to conquering all of Europe in 7 years. And then he kind of waved dismissively and he said, but he was an evil man and he's gone and that's over. And then he turned to me and he said, where is the Hitler for peace? Where is the person who is going to try to bring the world together, or who is going to, quote, conquer the world? Being a German, he loved military metaphors. Where is the person who's going to conquer the world for peace? Which was his thing. He was a devoted pacifist. He became a vegetarian in the prisoner of war camp in the late 1930s in Iran, thinking that he would die of malnutrition. He was a vegetarian his whole entire life. It was one of the things that attracted me to their program. So during that time, I encountered this book that was written by a fellow named Milton Mayer. Milton Mayer had, he was a reporter for, as I recall, the Chicago Sun, one of the big Chicago newspapers. And after the war, and he was Jewish too, he had a perspective on this. I mean, all Americans had a perspective on it, but after the Holocaust. And after the war, he went to his editor and he said, I'd like to go to Germany. Spend a year there. Get to know average Germans who didn't become Nazis, who didn't get drafted, as Herr Mueller had, or join, the Hitler Youth as von Heyer had, who just got, the world just changed around them, and write a book about it. And he did. And he spent that time in Germany. I'm not sure it was a whole entire year, but there were 10 average Germans. There was a baker, there was a bricklayer, there was a professor, and he stayed with these guys. He got to know them really, really well, and he wrote their stories in this book. They thought they were free, and I want to just share some small pieces from this book with you because I think it's instructive. Milton Mayer is passed on now, long ago. But his book is still in print. He says, now I see a little better how Nazism overcame Germany. Not by attack from without or by subversion from within, but with a whoop and a holler. It was what Germans wanted, or under pressure of combined reality and illusions, came to want. They wanted it, they got it, they liked it. I came home a little bit afraid for my country, afraid of what we might want and get and like under combined pressure of reality and illusion. I felt and feel that it was not German man that I met, but man. He happened to be in German under certain conditions. He might be here under certain conditions. He might, under certain conditions, be me. If I and my countrymen ever succumbed to that concatenation of conditions, no constitution, no laws, no police, and certainly no army would be able to protect us from harm. And then he tells the story. This is from his conversation with the college professor, who again, never joined the Nazis. He said, what happened here was the gradual habituation of the people, little by little, to being governed by surprise, to receiving decisions deliberated in secret, to believing that the situation was so complicated that the government had to act on information that people couldn't understand, or so dangerous that even if the people could understand it, it couldn't be released because of national security. This separation of government from people, this widening of the gap, took place so gradually and so insensibly, each step disguised, perhaps not even intentionally, as a temporary emergency measure or associated with true patriotic allegiance or with real social purposes. And all the crises and reforms, and many were real reforms, so occupied the people that they did not see the slow motion underneath of the whole process of government growing remoter and remoter. And then he gets to the point of all this, which is that everything still looks the same. He said, to live in this process is absolutely not to be able to notice it. Please try to believe me. Unless one has a much greater degree of political awareness, acuity than most of us ever had occasion to develop. Each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained, or on occasion regretted, that unless one were detached from the whole process from the beginning, unless one understood what the whole thing was in principle, what all these little measures that no patriotic German could resent must someday lead to, one no more saw it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing. And then one day, it is over his head. He says, one day too late, your principles, if you were ever sensible of them, all rush in upon you. The burden of self-deception has grown too heavy, and some minor incident, in my case it was my little boy, hardly more than a baby, saying, Jews, swine, collapses it all at once. And you see that everything has changed and completely changed under your nose. The world you live in, your nation, your people, is not the world you thought you were in at all. The forms are all still there, all untouched, all reassuring. The houses, the shops, the jobs, the meal times, the visits, the concerts, the cinema, the holidays. But the spirit, which you never noticed because you made the lifelong mistake of identifying it with the forms, is changed. And now you live in a world of hate and fear. And the people who hate and fear do not even know it themselves. When everyone is transformed, no one is transformed. Now you live in a system which rules without responsibility, even to God. He goes on to say, Pastor Niemöller spoke for the thousands and thousands of men like me when he spoke too modestly of himself and said that, when the Nazis attacked the communists, he was a little uneasy, but after all, he was not a communist, and so he did nothing. And then they attacked the socialists, and he was a little uneasier, but still he wasn't a socialist, and he did nothing. And then the schools, the press, the Jews, and so on. And he was always uneasier, but still he did nothing. And then they attacked the church, and he was a churchman. And he did something, but then it was too late. You see, one doesn't see exactly where or how to move. And this is the question that Rachel Maddow kept asking last night, and she never got an answer or gave an answer to the best of my knowledge, which is, what do we do? Back to the professor, the German professor in 1950. Believe me, this is true. Each act, each occasion is worse than the last, but only a little worse. You wait for the next and the next. You wait for the one great shocking occasion, thinking that all the others, when such a shock comes, will join with you in resisting somehow. You don't want to act or even to talk alone. You don't want to go out of your way to make trouble. Why not? Well, you're not in the habit of doing it. And it's not just fear of standing alone that restrains you. It is genuine uncertainty. And we'll come back to this on the other side of this break, but think about this. All these people who resigned from the Justice Department yesterday and maybe resigning today, how many people are in positions in our government who can't afford to resign? Who would lose their home if they resigned? If they took a principled stand, their lives would be destroyed. Their kids would end up homeless or unable to go to college. I mean, Reaganomics has created a system now where your kids can't reliably go to college without your help. What do they do?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Jefferson once said, well, it's a long story, actually. I'll continue with this in a minute. Stick around. It's 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Let's see here. Bob in Westminster, Colorado. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
So are you an NLP practitioner, by the way?
I am an NLP practitioner and trainer.
I have been familiar with that since 1980, and believe me, I'm for fear of this country because I think we are up to our necks in water already.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing of it is, the Democrats, I heard Pelosi this morning saying it was just a disappointment, and the Democrats need to take out the war words and start tagging this guy, because the only way to really beat him right now is to tag him with enough darts that he actually goes totally berserk and actually does really truly scare the right people.
They need to be calling him a fascist. I mean, the Republicans had no problem calling Obama a socialist and a communist even when he rolled out Obamacare.
They need to pull out the Republicans and expose them because they support his entire agenda.
The Republicans do. Yes. Yeah. They need to.
I'll let you go, Tom.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Bob. Yeah, they need to be. I mean, this is just beyond the pale. Dwayne in Lincolnville, Kansas. Hey, Dwayne, what's up?
Hi, Tom. What's happening in Kansas right now is that the Republicans, the Democrats want to get Medicaid for expansion here.
Mm-hmm.
And the Republicans say, well, in order to get that, we want to regulate abortion. And they're telling everybody, well, we don't want to be paying for poor people to have abortions.
Isn't Kansas already one of the most restrictive states in the country? And isn't that where George Tiller was murdered?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure. I think it was to the Topeka Planned Parenthood clinic where George Tiller was murdered. I may be wrong, but anyhow, continue, Dwayne.
No. I lived in California for a long time, and so I'm not really
so you're
familiar
new to Kansas.
with.
Okay.
But we're lucky we don't have Brownback anymore.
Yeah.
We do have a Democratic governor.
Yeah.
Which is good, but she's fighting to get Medicaid for everybody expansion, and they're saying they want to regulate abortions. Now, if they start regulating abortions, where will they stop? It seems like we flip-flop between a Republican and a Democrat governor every so often. What happens when we turn Republican again? Right. And where will the regulations stop?
Yeah, what you're looking at, Dwayne, is only marginally about abortion. What it's really about is the regulation of women. You've got a legislator, I don't recall which state it was. I nearly printed out the story this morning to go off on a rant, and then I thought I got more important things to talk about today, although this is a very important thing. Actually, it was over on Daily Kos, but I've got 18 seconds here. And what the state legislator was saying, they were planning on, the state legislature is preparing to do away with sales taxes on tampons. And he's like, well, if you do away with the sales tax on tampons, women are going to start buying too many tampons. It's like, really? It's this infantilization of women by these male Republican legislators. And abortion control is just a piece of it. Dwayne, thank you for the call. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. So the point that I want to make here, and we're going to go back to Milton Mayers, they thought they were free, is that everything still looks the same, right? When Trump messes with our criminal justice system, it still looks like we have a criminal justice system. When our churches start endorsing white supremacist right-wing bigotry, it still looks like we have churches. When our legislators still show up for legislative sessions and debate things, it looks like we still have a functioning democracy. But we don't. By the way, just a heads up on the. Well, I'll get back to that in a minute. So, back to this college professor that Milton Mayer was talking about back in the late 1940s. He talks about uncertainty as a very important factor. He says, you're not used to making trouble. He says, uncertainty is a very important factor, and instead of decreasing as time goes on, uncertainty grows. Outside in the streets, in the general community, everyone seems happy. One hears no protest and certainly sees none. You know, in France or Italy, there's slogans against the government painted on walls and fences. In Germany, though, outside the great cities, there's not even this. In the university community, my own community, you speak privately to your colleagues, some of whom certainly feel as you do, but what do they say? They say, it's not so bad. You're seeing things. You're being an alarmist. And you are an alarmist. You are saying that you know that this must lead to that, but you can't prove it. These are the beginnings, yes, but how do you know for sure when you don't know the end? And how do you know or even surmise the end? On the one hand, your enemies, the law, the regime, the party, they intimidate you. On the other, your colleagues poo-poo you as pessimistic or even neurotic. But that one great, shocking occasion, I talked about this yesterday, but that one great, shocking occasion, the college professor told Milton Mayer, and he wrote in, they thought they were free, when tens or hundreds of thousands will join you, never comes. That's the difficulty. If the last and worst act of the whole regime had come immediately after the first and the smallest, thousands, yes, millions would have been sufficiently shocked. Think kids in cages, by the way, as I'm reading this. Thousands would have been shocked. He said, if the last and worst act of the regime had come immediately after the first, if, let us say, the gassing of the Jews in 43 had come immediately after the German firm stickers, Germany First stickers in the windows of non-Jewish shops in 33. But of course, this isn't the way it happens. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So how do you think we stop this? We'll be back. Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amax, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Rhodesian the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In Part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And Part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series. On Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle. Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland. And Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. On By the way, the event in Los Angeles is sold out. So our KPFK fundraiser and all that sort of thing, it's where I'll be there with Stephanie Miller and Greg Pallas. It's sold out. In San Francisco, there are still tickets available for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series on the hidden history of voting. It's at the Hillside Club, 2286 Cedar Street in Berkeley. And you can get information on tickets at thomhartmann.com, or you can pick up tickets at the door. And in Seattle, I'll be there doing a gig at Seattle Town Hall. And Pramila Jayapal, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, the co-chair, along with Mark Pocan of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, will be joining me on stage for a Q&A. So be there or be square. All that information is over at thomhartmann.com. So not only did Hitler go after lefties, he went after gypsies, and he went after gay people. The Jews wore yellow stars, gay people wore pink stars. In fact, they were early on targeted to be put into the so-called work camps and then later into the death camps. And so yesterday we get the spectacle of Rush Limbaugh referring to Pete Buttigieg as booty geig. And he says, a gay guy, 37 years old, loves kissing his husband on debate stages. Can you see Trump having fun with that? Meanwhile, in Iowa, Republicans in the Iowa House of Representatives are advancing a piece of legislation that would require teachers to notify parents if they plan to mention Pete Buttigieg in the classroom. Pastor Brad Cranston, one of these, right-wing bigots who pretends to be a Christian, says, parents have the right to know exactly what the public school, which they are paying for with their tax dollars, is teaching their kids. Right. So, anyway, as I said, what can we do? I have a few ideas, a few suggestions. Let me just lay them out very quickly for you. Number one, you will recall we reported on this program that the Republican National Committee during the Trump impeachment paid to have a telemarketing firm have 11,000 phone calls. These were actual people, telemarketers, who normally are calling up and saying, hey, how'd you like to buy a new car or whatever. 11,000 times they called Republican senators during the impeachment to say, I support President Trump, stand firm, or words to that effect. So the Republican senators thought there was a groundswell of support for Trump. Well, I would suggest that whether you live in a state where you've got 2 Democratic senators, or a state where you've got 2 Republican senators, or a state where you've got one of each, you need to be calling 202-225-3121, respectfully and briefly, letting each of your senators and your member of the House of Representatives know this cannot stand. You guys have to stop Trump. You have to hold him accountable. And you have to do it now, and you have to do it loudly. This is no time for language like, well, I think this blows up the norms of government. No, you say, this is fascism. We're going down the road to Nazism here. This is how democracies are destroyed. And I would, I pray that our Democratic leaders will start speaking the truth about this stuff. Anyhow, Mark in Nashville, Tennessee. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I don't know how you're going to take my call, but I'm an independent black guy. And about this Pete Buttigieg, I'm not against gay marriage or, any of that. It's just, as far as my kid, I think it's too much for my kid to see a man kissing another man as president. When
Mark,
and
being gay is not contagious, and you need to get past your fear. And I'm assuming in your case it's fear and not hate, but you need to get past it. This is obviously something that Pete Buttigieg and every gay person in America has dealt with their whole entire lives. And in some cases, it's just ignorance or a lack of, knowing anybody who's gay, so you don't realize, it's easy to otherize people that you don't know. But, as I said, one of the reasons that Hitler went after gay people early on was that it was low-hanging fruit. And, of course, back then it was illegal to be gay in Germany. Hell, back then it was illegal to be gay in the United States. We've come a long way. So, anyway, what do we do? Rich in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Hey, I'm 53 years old, and for probably 52 years old, or at least 51 years, I've seen this coming. I grew up in some of the worst places Michigan has. I'm sure you've heard of Clinton Valley Center. I never did a damn thing to anyone or hurt anyone. I had rotten parents, and while my dad was off in Vietnam, my mom lied to get me committed. And I was a test guinea pig since I had no parents in many different institutions.
Rich, what's your point here?
My point is the only way to stop Trump is basically to do what they did with Hitler. They either got to corner him to the point, with this
No, I do. It's crazy talk. No offense, but we have to politically defeat him. Period. And we need to develop a coalition of people across the United States who are speaking out and speaking out loudly. We need to be contacting the media and raising hell. We need to be sharing with everybody we know our concern about this. We need to be speaking out clearly and unambiguously. We need to defeat the Republican senators who are complicit in this. We need to do something about, look at this thing with Facebook. This is from today's Financial Times. The headline, Facebook accuses telecom group of disinformation tactics. Facebook has alleged that one of Southeast Asia's largest telecom providers used tactics of trolls to discredit rivals. So Facebook is taking down companies that have trolls lying about their competitors, but they won't take down Donald Trump, who's lying about the Democratic Party. I mean, these are the things that we need to be doing something about. Francis in Palm Springs, California. Hey, Francis, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Good morning, and I'm glad to listen to you this morning. I had just a general observation about the Republican Party. They're too confident in the election of being reelected. They're not worried about being primaried, because if they were worried about being primaried, you would see a different tone. Their tone is of confidence. And
no, I disagree, Francis. That's not that. What you are saying is absolutely true of Donald Trump. I believe, though, that the majority of the Republican senators who are acting like timid little church mice, around Donald Trump, and when he bends over, they say, "Okay, I'm puckered up, I'm ready to go here." Those guys are afraid of a primary challenge from a Tea Party candidate, or another candidate supported by right-wing billionaires like the Kochs, like the Tea Party was. That's what they're afraid of, and I'm guessing that as we go through the primary season for the Republican Party and we start getting into May and June and July, you're going to start seeing, I am praying that you will start seeing some Republicans grow a spine once they know that their primary, that they've won their primary. But, I respectfully disagree with you, Francis. I think that is part of that's the largest part of their fear.
Okay, let me just ask you this. I remember Don Jr. Back at the Correspondents' Dinner before Trump was elected. He said something that no one has went back to look at yet. He said, our dinner will be better when we are here. And he said it with such confidence. And the confidence, to me, comes from the cheating that they know is going to go on.
Yeah.
The cheating that is going to go on.
And it's happening already. It is happening already. It is going on right now. Facebook is complicit in it. Facebook is helping with it, and this is something that we've all got to just acknowledge, right? Billionaire Zuckerberg is helping billionaire Trump, while billionaire Koch is funding all these organizations that are putting billionaire-friendly Republicans into state houses, state legislatures, state governorships, and the United States Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives. We are full-on oligarchy right now. Question is, can we pull ourselves back from it?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And if so, what's it going to take? And frankly, I think at the very least, it's going to take you. It's going to take all of us. Welcome back. 45 minutes past the hour. Amazing. Steve in Phoenix. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, good morning there, Tom. I would agree. I think not enough Americans are taking this situation seriously enough. Part of the thing is you can just look. You can see our sporting events are still taking place. Shopping malls are open. Stores are still serving meals in restaurants and such.
As they are in Erdogan's Turkey and Putin's Russia.
Yes.
As they were in Hitler's Germany.
You betcha. It's going on. And, I kind of, I'll have to agree. You brought this up. Well, one thing we can hopefully do is maybe we can get in Roe and Mark's ear, and maybe they can put a bug in Nancy's ear to start talking a little bit more about this, too.
Oh, we don't need them to tell you. I mean, she's getting all kinds of pressure to go harder. And frankly, she has said things out loud that I was saying about people. I mean, my concern about this, when I first started reading They Thought They Were Free, Milton Mayer's book, On the Air, it was when the Patriot Act was passed. And I said, when you give a president this kind of power, you are setting yourself up for a disaster down the road. And you could argue that Bush and Cheney abused that kind of power. In fact, you could argue that President Obama abused that kind of power to some extent. But Donald Trump, this is an existential threat. This is the end of democracy kind of threat. Anyhow, back to you.
Without a doubt. And I also agree this really began in 71 with the Powell Memo.
Yes. 2
Supreme Court decisions, the Citizens United one, and then with Trump's election. Where we are right at this present time, I feel right at the impeachment trial, we were just outside the doorstep. The doorstep. We were still in democracy. When they acquitted him, we are now one step in democracy, one step in fascism. If he is elected in 2020, it will be full-blown fascism. And that the election is our only legal way that I see, other than putting pressure on our people to. We can't do the 25th Amendment, apparently, and that's the only thing I see. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts, Tom? But thank you.
I think that the time for impeachment is long gone, Steve, and it ain't coming back. And as far as I can tell, number one, we need elected officials pushing back. And number two, we need to overwhelmingly win these elections, and right across the board. We need to sweep all of these complicit Republicans out of office all across the country. Thank you, Steve. Katie in Hamul, California. Hey, Katie, thanks for watching Free Speech.
Yeah.
What's up?
Hi, Tom. Last time I talked to you, it was about I'd been studying up a great deal on narcissistic personality because of my stepdaughter's problems, and she's now having to move under cover of night. But and about that Trump would not be leaving. So that was the last call. I was raised by parents who would say when we protested in the 60s, and they were all in favor of that brown shirts will knock on our door someday. And so I had the blessing of being raised by very, very whippet parents, followed politically, and felt that when Reagan let the right-wing Christians in, that we were done. And let us not forget that as much as we say we have lost our democracy, we pretty much did that in December of 2000. I can hear the music, and I've got a question for you.
Very quickly.
And that is, I am not a Bernie supporter. I'm anybody who can beat Trump supporter. And I'm afraid, talking to my own children who are Bernie Sanders supporters, that they are
Katie,
not.
I'm sorry.
Well,
Free Hang on just a second. Podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Katie and Hamul called a little earlier and got cut off by the break, but basically was saying that, I believe she was saying she's not a supporter of Bernie, but her kids are, and she's afraid that, if he's the nominee, and you could fill in the blank, right? I've heard people call and say, well, if Amy Klobuchar, she was trembling during the debate before last, or Joe Biden, he stutters, or fill in the blanks, right? It's Elizabeth Warren, she's a woman. Bernie, he's a socialist. If they get in, they won't be able to beat Trump. Well, a couple of things. Number one, the most recent study, and I believe this was Monmouth University, it might have been Quinnipiac, but it was one of those two, was just released a couple days ago. And that survey found that Bernie beats Trump 51-43. And Bloomberg beats Trump 51-42, and every other candidate beats Trump substantially. Most of the other candidates were in the high 40s versus Trump at 42-43. Trump is stuck at 42 or 43%. Now, keep in mind, we are 9 months out from the election. And elections have absolutely, this far out from the election in 1980, Jimmy Carter was just kicking Ronald Reagan's butt. And then Reagan cut a deal with the Iranians to hold the hostages. And suddenly things changed. So I wouldn't put anything past Trump. But the bottom line is I trust the wisdom of the crowd. We've had this conversation before. The whole story of the Red Deer democracy is in our DNA and all this kind of stuff. I trust the wisdom of the crowd. And I think that, whoever our nominee is, that person will be able to beat Trump, but they won't be able to do it without our help. David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, what's up?
Yes, good morning, Tom. You were asking a question, how can we stop this? And, from the perspective of a French person living in the United States, I think that it's going to need to get very, very, very bad, Trump arresting journalists, maybe Trump shutting down CNN or something extremely drastic for people to wake up, because
he's already put children in cages, David. He had killed some of them.
You're right, Tom, but nobody cares about Latino people. I think it's going to have to happen to, I'm sorry to say, but
middle-class white people.
Things are gonna,
yeah.
Yes, because nobody cares about brown people, and that's something I've been observing. And Trump is the swamp, His friend Roger Stone is behind the super PACs and all that legal corruption. So corruption has been legal forever in the United States. That's something I think, I've been observing.
Yeah.
So I think, it's just going to need maybe for him to shut down SNL, comedians, journalists, and otherwise I see him getting reelected. And
well, we'll see. This was the thing from they thought they were free, where he says we all kept waiting for that one great shocking event. Instead, it became incremental, and if the last thing that had happened right after the first thing that had happened, everybody would have been in the streets. But because everything was small and incremental, we didn't get there. And I am not holding my breath for the great shocking event. In fact, what we saw over the last 2 days is a great shocking event, and people are not in the streets. We have to spread the word. We have to share this with people. We have to wake up America. We are losing our democracy, David, and we have to start using this very blunt language. And I salute Bill Maher and Rachel Maddow and apparently Don Lemon for saying it out loud. It needs to be said every single day. This is not normal. This is not small d democracy. This is not how genuine republics are run. This man is an aberration, and he is beyond an aberration. He is a threat to our nation. David, thank you for the call. Nick in Huntington, West Virginia. Hey, Nick, what's up?
Well, I've been watching this go on for 3 years. I think he's a total fascist. I was raised by my grandparents who was in World War II and the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. They were Republicans, but they like still had the common sense to see when they were doing the country wrong. Even though they didn't support Roosevelt in their later years, they started wanting to, they realized what he'd done.
Right.
He gave them Social Security. This was poor people up here in West Virginia. I'm a poor person. And I just feel it's all out for the corporations and the rich right now. And those poor people, black, white, green, purple, need to stand together and do something.
Yeah. I'm with you, and we've got to do it fast. Thanks a lot for the call. Dave in Inverness, Florida. Hey, Dave, we just have a minute to the end of the hour. What's up?
Yeah, hey, Tom. I've just recognized something about the dirty tricks they're pulling on Bernie again. He mentioned the other day, Tom, that Buttigieg has got like 40 donations from billionaires. They want to run against Buttigieg. That's what they want. And another thing that they dirty tricks.
You mean they being
I've
Trump?
learned this here. What?
Trump wants to run against Buttigieg.
That's right. Yeah. And not only that, Tom, but what they'll do, they can switch parties right now in these primaries and try to primary Bernie. The New Hampshire race was just anybody could vote for anybody they wanted, including Republicans or independents. So they don't care. They don't think they're wasting their vote, but they're trying to primary him. I'm telling you right now, that's the dirty tricks that I learned right here in Inverness, Florida.
Yeah, well, Donald Trump said the other day that Bernie's actually got a movement behind him. He would be the most formidable opponent. I think there's some truth to that, but it's still, like I said, it's still 9 months to go, and there's a bunch of elections ahead of us, and let's hang on for the ride. And in the meantime,
you know who I'm going to vote for, just like I did the last time, Bernie.
Okay, good luck, Dave. Thanks a lot for the call. And we need to be waking up our friends, and we need to be sharing our concerns and using social media and talking to your neighbors and calling your legislators.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using 3 simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2-to-1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up, and other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for the hidden history of voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series. On Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle. Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland. And Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Fox News plus Russia. It's Joyanne Reed's book, The Man Who Sold America.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Lord willing and the flu gods hold off. I'm going on the road tomorrow. To Saturday, I'll be in Los Angeles. That event is sold out. Monday night, there are still tickets available at the Berkeley Arts and Letters for the Hidden History of the War on Voting, my new book. It's at the Hillside Club, 2286 Cedar Street, Berkeley. And you can get information at thomhartmann.com or get tickets at the door. And in Seattle, which will be Wednesday night, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal will be joining me on stage at the Seattle Town Hall for a Q&A. And so be there or be square. Again, information at thomhartmann.com. On the line with us right now is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist and co-founder of Democracy at Work, author of numerous books. His latest is Understanding Socialism, democracyatwork.info, and rdwolf with 2fs.com are his websites. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here, and good luck with your flu.
Yeah, thank you. I'm on the tail end of it, so I think it's getting better. I shared a couple of stories with you in email, or Sean did, and let me just pop a couple of these stats out, and then I'm rather hysterical about that. I'm worried about this. This concerns me tremendously, and I'd like you to either explain it or talk me down off the ledge here. The first is from wolfstreet.com. Auto loans and lease balances have surged to a new record of $1.33 trillion. And subprime loans in that category, these are people with credit scores below 620, have exploded at a breathtaking rate. And the delinquencies now are up to $66 billion. They're up 15% from just the last year. We're looking at delinquencies in this area that are mind-boggling. The total market for these kind of loans is $293 billion, and $68 billion of them are more than 90 days delinquent. That's about a quarter of all subprime auto loans are delinquent. And then to make it even more bizarre, these things have been packaged into asset-based securities, which is what shut down the entire economy in 2008 when mortgages were being done this way. And now it's these car loans being done this way. And then on top of that, this piece from Raw Story and from DC Report by Maureen Neffen-Duffy, where she talks about the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, which regulates things like, if these things are being resold as securities, is supposed to regulate this stuff. Trump has picked apparently all 5 members of the commission. They just voted 3-2 in favor of leaving a giant hole in Dodd-Frank so that the big 4 banks, and just the big 4 banks, can continue to do this. During 2016, apparently they're doing the same thing with credit cards that these other companies are doing with car loans. They opened 110 million new credit card accounts, about 50% more than in 2010, and they're also big in the credit default swap business. Only this time it's consumer debt. I mentioned car loans a minute ago. Now also we've got credit cards. The Federal Reserve valued outstanding credit card loans at $1.2 trillion. Citibank, J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Bank of America handled 90% of U.S. swap trades. This is a $300 trillion business when we have, a $20 trillion economy? And the big picture reveals, and I'll end with this, quote, a financial infrastructure that mimics the failed financial engineering created in the mortgage markets leading up to the 2008 financial crash. And that's from the guy who was the deputy to Brooksley Born, the chair of the Consumer Finance, CFTC, during Bill Clinton's era. So explain this, what does all this mean and what could its consequences be?
Okay. It's a mixture of good news and horrific news. So I don't know if I'm going to get you off the ledge, but maybe I'll move you around on the ledge a little bit. Here we go. The thing that the people say who have to defend what you've just described, the only thing they can say is that the auto loan business, the credit card business, and you could even add the student loan business, which, by the way, has a just as scary a scenario about it as the other two that you just described. What the people who defend all this say is that the total size of these markets, the credit markets, is smaller than the mortgage loan business. That's because more Americans have taken out more money to buy homes than have done all those other things in the way of credit. Right. Other than that, they have nothing to say. So let me pick up at that point where they fall silent. Yes, it's true. The size that they point to is correct. And so on one level, if terrible things begin to unravel in the credit card business, the auto loan business, the student loan, and all of them have been packaged into securities sold around the world, it won't have the immediate massive effect that the crash in 2008 did. But it is exactly the same story, and it's the same explanation. In the crash of 2000, if people can go back that far in their memories, so-called dot-com crash, one of the things the government did to prevent a full-blown depression was bring interest rates very, very low. And what that did was make all the people who hustle other people's money look elsewhere. Where can I get better rate of return now that interest rates are so low? And lending to people with dubious credit, to whom you could charge fantastic interest rates, was where they went. Exactly the same thing is happening now that we have, again, a 10-year period of unusually low interest rates to prevent the crash of 2008 from being a full-blown depression. So everywhere where wealthy people have money, they are pressing their advisors, their hedge funds, to find lucrative, interest-returning, profitable investments. And lending to poor people or people with credit scores below 620 who have to pay higher interest rates because they're in that pool has attracted risky investments in the car business, in the credit card business, and so on. If those begin to fall apart, the contagion from that will lop over into the mortgage market. Let me give you a simple example. I would say half of my students who are carrying debt that they cannot ever pay back, which they tell me, is not really debt for them as students. They are helping out their parents by borrowing as students money that their parents couldn't get from anything they could borrow from, or would have to pay even higher interest rates. So the actual boundary among these different categories is a lot more porous than you might think of if the statistics are not explained. Bottom line, we are now in a full-fledged credit bubble. The government is pouring money into the economy, again, like it did before the crash of 2008. That money is sloshing around and producing stock prices that are unconnected to the underlying real economy. And a good bit of that money is flowing into the hands of people with the poorest credit and therefore the highest likelihood of being unable to pay back. We have the highest levels of debt, personal, corporate, and government, in our history as a nation, which means a problem anywhere through the lending system will be a problem everywhere. Anyone who takes seriously the history of these successive bubbles has to look at the current situation and clap their hand on their forehead, as you have done, and said, oh, my God, are we so backward that we're heading into it again? And the answer to that question is yes.
Wow. So what is it about these politicians that makes this happen? I mean, you know, this easy credit thing in the late 90s, early 2000s that led to the crash of 2008, a very similar thing, I believe, in the 1920s, the Roaring '20s that led to the crash of 1929. And now you got Trump demanding that Jay Powell lower interest rates even further, which would jack credit up even higher. What is it?
That's right. They never learn. They're under the pressure of the people who have the money, who want that money to grow, who think of the system as a growth animal that will always make them more money. They put enormous pressure on the corporations whose stock they mostly own to deliver the rising rates of return. In a society like ours, where a majority of the people barely make it from month to month, producing more goods for people who can't afford them already and who are in debt over their heads is not a paying proposition. So you lend them money so they can buy a bit more. You charge big interest. Look, Mr. Johnson over in England yesterday fired his Secretary of the Treasury equivalent, the Exchequer, because he wasn't willing to pump up the economy with funny money the way Mr. Trump had led him to believe is the road to success. That's what politicians do in the system we have, and you're going to have to change that system if you expect the people at the top of it to behave otherwise.
Why, you know, the solution to this was supposed to be Dodd-Frank. Why isn't it helping?
Because it's exactly the same history again as we saw. You know, out of the Great Depression came the Banking Act. It created a firewall between investment banks and commercial banks.
Glass-Steagall.
That's right. And it did a whole host of the other things that Dodd-Frank did. And over the immediate period afterwards, the banks had exactly the same strategy they've had this time. You begin by evading the law, which is not that difficult to do. Then you turn with your political paid folks to weaken the law. And when finally you're capable of being strong enough politically, you get rid of the law, as they did with Glass-Steagall, that was signed out of existence in the 1990s by, it might be worth remembering, Bill Clinton as president. You're seeing exactly the same now. They delayed. There are parts of Dodd-Frank passed years ago that still have not been implemented because they're studying how best to do that. That's pure evasion. Yeah. And so you're seeing now the weakening, and it is the same scary.
So we have 30 seconds, Professor Wolff. What can we do as individuals and as a society?
Two things. One, learn about this stuff. Pay attention to the critics. There's enough of them out there in all walks of life so that you're aware of what is being hustled by you. But the second one is to recognize that punishing a banker or passing this or that law, we've been there, we've done that. Much more basic change in this society is needed. Yes, it's scary, but not doing it ought to make you even more scared.
So, okay. Thank you. Professor Richard Wolff, rdwolff.com and democracyatwork.info, and his most recent book, Understanding Socialism. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thank you, Tom, and have a good trip.
Thank you very much. Always great talking with you. We'll be back in just a moment with, more of our conversation about how do we save democracy. I also wanted to get into Michael Bloomberg. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Bloomberg's getting the same kind of free press right now that Donald Trump was getting 4 years ago. What does that mean? Where do we go with this? Stick around. And welcome back. Let's see here. Marilyn in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. Hey, Marilyn, what's on your mind today?
Tom, you were talking before about the percentages different people have and beating Trump by this and that, and I've seen all of that. It has everybody beating Trump. But the reality is we had the same thing with Hillary, and she didn't win.
That's right.
The election is going to be won or lost in certain states. We all know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had heard about 6 weeks ago that there was some kind of polling done in these battleground states. And they said that the people there prefer a centrist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who did the polling. I don't know if it was the Democratic Party.
Yeah, if you can't cite the poll and the details of it, Marilyn, it may not be true. But the fact of the matter is that polls this far out are largely meaningless. It's, the polls,
Right.
the poll that's going to count is going to be on November, I think it's the 3rd this year, the actual election. And the polls in the weeks leading up to that are the ones that are going to be more meaningful. But, Donald Trump has this $1 billion, they call it the Death Star, this $1 billion massive misinformation, disinformation lie machine that has, as I recall, over 4,000 data points on every single American. They, and this is stuff that Mark Zuckerberg, by and large, has given to Donald Trump. He knows whether you like cats or dogs. He knows, whether you have a problematic kid or not. He knows whether you're married or not. He knows everything about you. And he's going to figure out a way to design an ad that just talks to Marilyn. And that's why they've got over 1,400 ads that all kind of look the same right now on Facebook, but each one is customized to a unique type of person. It's going to get more granular than that as time goes on. This is going to be a really difficult campaign.
Well, I believe I heard this on MSNBC. I think they reported it.
Well, MSNBC as an institution loves centrists. I mean, they've been promoting Amy Klobuchar from day one, particularly the Rachel Maddow show.
That could be. But I am concerned that if we don't win these key states, we lose to Trump again, and that scares the heck out of me.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, in most of the swing states, I believe in most of the swing states, I know certainly in Michigan and Wisconsin, in the primary, Bernie Sanders beat Hillary Clinton. And beat her decisively. And West Virginia, in West Virginia, he beat Hillary Clinton by something like 30 points. I think
And you were talking about the exit polling the other day in these states that showed Hillary winning. I don't know if you remember that, but the same thing happened in 2004 here in Florida when Kerry was running.
Yes.
NBC, I believe, projected him the winner in Florida, and all of a sudden they took it back and said, oh, sorry, no, it's Bush.
Right, and that's because of voter suppression by Jeb Bush. And the same thing happened in Ohio, by the way. The exit polls in Ohio showed Kerry overwhelmingly winning. And when the governor of Ohio actually, added up the votes, I think it was, the Secretary of State was Ken Blackman. I don't recall who the governor was, but when Ken Blackman tabulated the votes, it was, gee, what a surprise!
This scares me. I hope we can get a fair election.
Yeah, well, we will not get a fair election. I can guarantee you that, and that's why we need to turn out in absolutely overwhelming numbers. Thank you, Marilyn. Good talking to you. We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the true people's media. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Joseph in Ireland. Wow. Hey, Joseph, yesterday we had a call from, I think it was Sweden. That's right. Today it's Ireland. Joseph, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, just to give you, I suppose, a perspective from across the water. I am a Bernie supporter and follow his campaign very closely, and in general, the full campaign at the moment. But assuming that the DNC realise that Bernie is, I suppose, the strongest candidate, if he continues to go the way he is, and if they do get behind him, most certainly, he will and has the full wherewithal to beat Trump. However, where I would see a problem is, let's assume he beats Trump. I cannot see Trump leaving the White House. And I think he would use Bernie's democratic socialism, although as he likes to say, socialism stroke communism now is the most recent one, to stand his ground in the White House and rally his base to say, to save America. He's not going to allow it to become a socialist or communist state, And I think that's the stance he'll actually take, and use that, as I said, to rally his base. And unfortunately, probably rally them with arms, a call to arms as such, as well as a call to action.
I think you're right, Joseph, and I think that if Bloomberg gets elected, he'll say, the guy just bought the election, that's not fair, this is a scam, I'm not going to leave. If Klobuchar gets elected, he's going to say, oh, you can't just have, some little woman, these are a dangerous world, or he'll figure out some way to slam her. If it's Joe Biden, he'll say, you don't want this corrupt guy whose son was in Ukraine. I mean, he'll figure out, I don't know specifically what he'll say, but he'll figure out an excuse regardless of who it is, and I don't think that what Trump's excuse might be should dissuade us from supporting or not supporting the candidate that we think, A, best represents our values, and B, can beat Trump. Or maybe we should reverse the order of those two things. Although it appears that all of the Democratic candidates at this point in time can easily beat Trump. But I don't think there's going to be anything easy about it. And I share your concern that Trump is not going to leave the White House, and we have to be prepared for that. We have to, and he wouldn't be the first guy to do this, by the way. He would be the first guy in American history to do this. But now you look all around the world, he absolutely would not be the first guy to do this.
Yeah,
so
I think he's too far gone in trouble, let's say, to do anything else, only dig his heels in and
I agree, because his alternative, once he's out of office, is he goes to jail. So
exactly.
I'm with you. Joseph, thanks for watching the show, and there in Ireland.
Yeah, lovely.
Appreciate it. Good talking with you.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Wanted to share some of Blake Zeff's observations about Bloomberg with you, and after the break, and then we'll continue picking up your phone calls. Years of strategy and struggle against the prison industrial complex. It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism. For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression: patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war, war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition Now. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland. And Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. And just FYI, Saturday in Los Angeles is sold out. But there are still tickets available for, Monday? Yeah, Monday in San Francisco at 7 p.m. That's at the Hillside Club, 2286 Cedar Street in Berkeley, and you can get information at thomhartmann.com, just FYI. So I mentioned I wanted to talk about Michael Bloomberg a little bit. Michael Bloomberg is like, he has become the presence on MSNBC and CNN. And particularly on MSNBC. And I think, part of the reason is that he's spent close to $500 million so far carpet bombing states where there's going to be primaries in the next few weeks, in addition to some national advertising. And it has kicked him up in the polls to where he's above Elizabeth Warren right now. He's number 3 in the national polls. And in some of these individual states, he's gotten way, way up there. With African-American voters nationwide, he's over 20% now, which is substantial. So what's the deal? Blake Zeff, over on Twitter, laid out a thread. He notes he covered Bloomberg as a journalist, as a New York City journalist, and, worked with some of Bloomberg's top aides. He points out that what Bloomberg is doing right now in his run for the White House is pretty much the same thing that he did in his run for New York mayor. And he gives an example from a story back, now this was back when Bloomberg was a Republican and a friend of Rudy Giuliani's and promoting stop and frisk. All of things that would probably not cause the pastor of a black church to endorse him. But here's a news story. A few weeks ago, the Reverend Calvin O. Butts III, the influential pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, came to a difficult decision, one he had wrestled with all summer. He would not endorse William C. Thompson, Jr., the city comptroller and a longtime friend and ally for mayor, as he had promised Mr. Thompson last spring. Instead, he would endorse Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg. Mr. Thompson was furious at the betrayal, but what he did not know was that Mr. Bloomberg had given a $1 million donation to the church's development corporation, roughly 10% of its annual budget, with the implicit promise of more to come. And then they quote Pastor Butts. He said, "What could I say to a man who was mayor and was supportive of a lot of programs that are important to me?" Okay. So in this campaign, Washington Post, Bloomberg spent $2.2 million to help elect Representative Mikey Sherrill, Democrat from New Jersey, $2.2 million to help elect Representative Haley Stevens, Democrat from Michigan, $4.5 million to elect Representative Harley Rouda, R-O-U-D-A, Democrat of California. All 3 members have endorsed Bloomberg's presidential campaign. So, you help people out, they help you. In 2018, Mike spent about again, I'm quoting from this thread, Mike spent about $110 million to boost 24 candidates in Congress, and he quotes an article about it. Goes on to say community groups back Mike's candidacy. He reversed a voter referendum on term limits. When he became mayor of New York had term limits. You could only be mayor for 2 terms. Bloomberg was mayor for 2 terms. He wanted to stay for a 3rd term. And turns out that, how did he do that? Well, charity backing Bloomberg 3rd term got millions. Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg has donated millions to the Doe Fund, whose leaders just helped him alter term limits. And then after changing parties from the Republican to Independent in 2007 as mayor, the Republican Party never attacked him. Why? Well, again, here's a news story from WNYC. Bloomberg gives record $1 million to State Senate GOP, the single largest donation ever received by the by the Republicans in the House of Representatives. And then, the campaign has grassroots support. Look at all these people showing up for his events. Well, he quotes, he cites a picture showing Mike Bloomberg rally tonight in Philadelphia is catered and really good food and free wine. And then there's the stuff, Mike poaches talent from other campaigns. Michael Bloomberg's campaign staff get a MacBook Pro and an iPhone 11 on their first day and 3 catered meals a day, not to mention good pay. And he's paying for people to say nice things about him on Instagram, $150 a whack. And then, of course, there's the nonstop ads. And then one ad portrays him as Obama's best friend, even though he didn't endorse Obama back in 2008 and barely did in 2012, scolding Obama for being partisan, divisive, and a populist. But basically, because he controls the ads, he can craft whatever narrative or message he wants. So all of that sounds like, and I think was meant by Blake Zeff, as an indictment of Mike Bloomberg, as a way of saying, don't vote for this guy. We shouldn't support this guy. This guy shouldn't become the Democratic nominee. And I can understand that sentiment. That said, I remember a few years back, hearkening back to the Buckley decision in 1976, which made the Bloomberg candidacy possible. In 1976, the Supreme Court said if an individual billionaire wants to fund their own campaign, they can ignore all the campaign finance laws, or virtually all of them. They can do anything they want because it's their money, and money is speech, and the right to free speech is guaranteed by the First Amendment. So I think the equation that many Americans are making is, if you need, Donald Trump is a billionaire. He's got $1 billion war chest. He's developed this Death Star super sophisticated data thing with help from Mark Zuckerberg, another billionaire in Facebook. If it's going to take essentially a dirty billionaire to beat another dirty billionaire, at least he's my dirty billionaire. I think that's the math that people are doing, and it's certainly the story that's essentially, boiled down to a fairly crass summary. The story that I think is being portrayed on MSNBC and CNN, or at least that I've seen that's really catching on over the last few days. Maybe they see this as the last chance to stop Bernie. I don't know. What's going on in the back rooms in these networks. But I think for the average voter, they're saying that. And I'll just say, if Bloomberg ends up being our nominee because he was able to buy his way into it. And, somebody asked him the other day, are you trying to buy the election? How do you respond to people who say you're trying to buy the election? He's like, I'm not trying to buy the election any more than anybody else who runs campaign ads who are trying to buy the election. And I suppose you could say there's some truth to that. He's playing by the rules of the game that the Supreme Court, a highly corrupted Supreme Court. This is why my last book was The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. This is one of their major betrayals. But the Supreme Court set the rules. And those rules make it a hell of a lot easier for a billionaire like Donald Trump or like Michael Bloomberg to become president of the United States than for any average person. Period, full stop. And, so if that's what it takes, then maybe that's what it takes. I'm remaining relatively agnostic on this. I'm back in the day, on this program even, although a lot of the Bloomberg stuff happened long before we were on the air, but, I was opposed to stop and frisk, and I thought it was a horrible policy. And then Bloomberg was essentially, the new video that's out is his essentially defending redlining, excuse me, which is, a insanely reprehensible policy. Will he be able to walk back from those? Well, a major black politician just came out and endorsed him a few minutes ago. So, and I'm sorry I don't have their name. I caught it on CNN as it was flying by while I was on the air. So we'll see. We'll see. Tom in Jerusalem, Israel. Hey, boy, we're getting a lot of international viewers on YouTube. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Actually, I'm an expat, and I look at what's going on in Trumpistan with great, great concern. I would think whatever your candidate is, and again, I agree with you so much that this is an existential threat. Existential threat. This man has to be defeated. And you need to put somebody in, at least on the vice presidential ticket, that's going to give you some leadership and inspire people. And if you saw Tammy Duckworth's speech on the Senate floor, I can see why the Republicans wanted that coverage suppressed, because she was so articulate.
You're talking during the impeachment
smart.
hearings.
Exactly. And I know her personally. I was commissioned with her. I, of course, didn't go to the war she went to. Okay? That's another
and
issue.
She lost both legs there. Yeah.
Yes. Trust me. I would have went to Canada, but they were sending people back. W needed his people for surges. Anyway, long story short, she, I think, could deliver the kind of speech like Ronald Reagan did in 1964. And my dad, I think he ended up voting for Goldwater. He voted for, long story short, my dad's not Jewish. He voted for George Wallace in 1968, 72, 76, whatever. We're at a watershed point in history.
Yeah.
And you need somebody who can articulate. And trust me, I'm not crazy about her because she's so close. You know, she was sitting with Karl Rove on a dais back at the Reagan Defense Forum, you know, December 6th of last year, okay?
Well, defense is her thing. I mean, she's on armed services and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, she's a little bit more of a hawk than I'm comfortable with. But she's a Democrat and she's competent. And
well, frankly, I'm a socialist. Period. Thank you for putting Dr. Wolf on. But I think it's like Wendell Phillips when he called President Lincoln a first-rate, second-rate man. Okay, but look at what Lincoln pulled off. Yeah. Maybe this is what we need. A mother. We need a mother of the country, and somebody in a wheelchair. FDR brought the country to greatness. Yes. And maybe she has that.
And
anyway,
without sounding like I'm endorsing Michael Bloomberg, because I absolutely, totally, last thing on earth am not.
I hate the guy too.
But the two most revered presidents, Democratic presidents of the 20th century, Franklin Roosevelt and Jack Kennedy, were both
bingo.
You know, they were the richest men who were ever president of the United States.
Yep.
So
no doubt about it.
Yeah, Tom, it's getting complicated. It's getting complicated. Tom, thank you for the call.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
No,
it's all,
sir. It's all good. Thank you very much. It's great to hear from you. Catherine in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Catherine, what's up?
Yes, hi.
Oh, hey, Catherine, let me put you on hold. We're hitting a break here. I'm very sorry. Let me just put you on hold here, and I'll get to you in just a moment. I was not paying attention to my clock. It's 47 minutes and change past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with Catherine's thoughts and yours if you're on hold, and mine as well. More of the news of the day. Just a FYI, Pramila Jayapal will be joining me in Seattle Town Hall for a Q&A about the hidden history of the war on voting. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And information is also available at thomhartmann.com on, the whole book tour that's starting tomorrow. And welcome back. Catherine, I'm sorry, Catherine, to cut you off like that. I usually have a better eye on the clock here in front of me. My apologies.
Oh, no, don't apologize. I just wanted to say you've been asking all day, what can we do about the current political predicament? And my answer is revolution through the vote. Through the vote.
Yeah, that's part of my two or three step process is, not only do you have to get out to vote, and if you live in a red state, make sure that they haven't purged your name from the voting rolls, but get everybody get your brothers and sisters and kids and parents and friends and neighbors and coworkers and the guy down the street that you only see once a year.
Tom.
Yeah.
Tell them we're in a revolution through the vote.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure revolution is the word you always want to use. It works with some folks, but okay. All right. You got it, Catherine. I'm all in favor, and do it. Thank you very much for the call. Mike in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Hey, Mike, what's up? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. From Cheeseland, by the way. And every time we say cheese up in Wisconsin, you smile.
There you go.
It feels good to say cheese, doesn't it?
It does. Cheese.
Yeah, but listening to your show, and I sure appreciate everything you do. We cannot overstate the risks that we're facing, and when we're talking about the money influence, I was reminded by Dr. Wolf of all these corporations that have not only had multi-billion-dollar annual profits, but are getting hundreds of millions or even $1 billion in tax refunds.
Hundreds of billions of dollars in tax cuts.
And when we tie it all together, and by the way, we're not even talking then all the billions that they're offshoring. They keep us away. It's really something how these groups like the Business Roundtable and other groups of the CEOs within the Fortune 200 companies, how by investing a couple $1 million from each one of these corporations, the net return is just staggering. And when you then look at the industries that they represent, I mean, whether it's Pfizer, Citigroup, Honeywell, GE, it's the who's who of pharma, of healthcare, it's food, it's insurance, it's energy, it's banks, it's military. It goes on and on. So, again, we cannot overstate the risks, and we cannot overstate the need for a massive turnout, because that is really and truly, I think, the only true way, the best way to, gain at least some control back and pivot away from this insanely obnoxious corporate structure that we're subservient of.
Well, and let's call what Trump is building what it is. He is building a fascist infrastructure into the existing institutions of our federal government.
Yeah,
and Bill Barr is
his
shock is at the head of his shock troops.
Yeah, and now we have industries that are in the misinformation business that popped up 10, 20, in the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And it's really something. So, again, it is in our hands. It's up to us. Nobody else is going to save the day.
Yeah, we are the ones who are going to save us. I'm with you, Mike. Thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thank you for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be back. It's 51 minutes past the hour. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair, but only slightly unbalanced. I'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your thoughts and mine right after this. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, encouraging our elected officials by calling the Congressional Switchboard at 202-224-3121, encouraging your elected officials to stand up to Donald Trump and to stop us from this slide toward fascism, number one. Number two, learning about your local elected officials. Most people don't have any idea who their state representative is or their state senator is. Find out. Who's your governor? Learn what's going on. Get involved. I'm telling you, Charles Koch and the billionaire buddies and his billionaire buddies are very involved in state politics. You should be too. Whatever Democratic candidate you're supporting, do whatever you can to support them. And however it shakes out, commit right now that you are going to vote blue no matter who. You know, I made the joke yesterday I'd vote for one of Bill the Cat's hairballs over Donald Trump. You know, I stand by that. And Mike Bloomberg even is much better than a Bill the Cat hairball. But, you know, we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's going to be real interesting to see if, you know, Americans will pick a billionaire over, a politician. Well, I guess Bloomberg is a politician, too. We'll see. I don't know. But the bottom line is whoever the people choose, and we're part of the people, we play a role in this. You know, we all need to get behind. And then finally, make sure that your voter registration is up to date, and you're going to have to check it every couple months if you live in a red state, particularly if you have a common last name for African Americans or a common Hispanic last name. Republicans will purge you from the voting list if you live in a state with a Republican Secretary of State. If you live in a democratically controlled state, probably not a problem. But red states, look out. So anyhow, to your phone calls here. Gloria in Shannon, North Carolina. Hey, Gloria, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to make a comment on everybody's making the statement that Trump is this and Trump is that. If people would have paid attention to Trump's past, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, Trump done an interview with Howard Stern. And in that interview, Howard Stern asked him, was he going to run for president as a Democrat? And Howard Stern told him, he said, you know, Democrats are not going to elect you. He told him no. He said he was going to run as a Republican. Because Republicans are stupid, and they'll believe anything you tell them.
I remember.
And that's what he converted over to being a Republican.
Yeah, he's a con man. He knows who his marks are.
Exactly. And I also want to tell for people to know that Trump lost his own precinct in New York. He only got about 15% of the vote in his own precinct, the precinct he votes in.
Yeah, that's probably why he's moved his residence to Florida.
Vote. So they should have known that if people would have paid any amount of attention, they'd have known that Trump was not the person they needed to put in an office such as the presidency.
Yeah, look at the people who know him.
For everybody to understand, these, like you said, if your name is synonymous with black, with
if it's a common African American last name or a Hispanic last name, look out. Double check your.
Out, yes, keep checking.
Yeah, particularly there in North Carolina, Gloria. They're in Shannon, North Carolina.
Mine is not, and I don't have that problem.
Well, good. But
I have neighbors
still double check, because you may be living in a neighborhood where that's the problem. You know, we should all don't take anything for granted if you live in a red state. That's the bottom line. Gloria, thank you so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book, Frederick Douglass, by David Blight. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. The book, Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. You know, I wanted to share a story with you that I think is a really important one here. As the world burns, more and more fossil fuels are being used every day worldwide. We're not seeing a reduction in fossil fuel production or consumption. We're seeing a steady increase around the world. And atmospheric carbon dioxide levels just this last week at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, this is like, you know, the top of this giant mountain where they can get relatively pristine air, and because they're out in the middle of the Pacific, it's not being influenced by nearby emissions like, you know, a power plant in the next state, that kind of thing. They just hit 416 parts per million. In the 300,000 years since modern human beings populated this planet, carbon dioxide levels have never been this high. The fossil fuel industry has literally created an atmosphere to which the human species is not adapted. And as a consequence of that, we are seeing, I just saw there's a massive storm right now heading for Western Europe, a bomb cyclone. Now, I don't recall bomb cyclones even being a thing prior to about 10 years ago. But they're a thing because the Arctic is melting, and large chunks of the Arctic have melted. And the result of that is that ice cap up there, which used to stabilize the weather patterns of the northern hemisphere, are largely gone. And so you've got the jet stream doing all these drooly things that it never did before, and so you end up with weather patterns moving far more slowly than they used to because the jet stream has weakened and it's not traveling as fast. And the result of that is that when you get rain, instead of getting 1 day of rain, you get 5 days of rain, which is called a flood. And when you get drought or high-pressure dry area, instead of getting a week of high-pressure dry area, nice weather, you get a year of it or 6 months of it. And the consequence of that, you can see in Australia right now, the entire continent is on fire. You see it in California during the summer. Wildfire season is going to start in a couple of months here in the northern hemisphere. Sea level is rising. There was a huge chunk of ice just broke off of Antarctica earlier this week. We're seeing Greenland melting to the tune of billions of gallons of water an hour. This is something that our species, our human race, has never before confronted. And we're just at the very, very earliest part of it in terms of seeing the actual unambiguous changes, the cyclones and hurricanes and tornadoes and massive storms and high winds and floods and droughts and bomb cyclones. We're just starting to see this, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse unless we do two things. Number one, we have to stop producing these fossil fuels and burning these fossil fuels. And, you know, that's the we must do it. And the good news is that we now have the technology to do that. We have the technology to produce as a transportable liquid energy system, hydrogen, for example, which can be made by simply running electricity through water. It splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen. One element accumulates on the positive pole, and one element accumulates on the negative pole, the cathode and anode, and actually it's the other way around. And you can just take the hydrogen. Bill Gates just commissioned a super yacht that runs on hydrogen that you can make out of seawater. And you can generate the electricity to make that hydrogen with solar panels. I mean, there are possibilities. But here we just hit 416 parts per million. This should be a screaming headline all over the world. And as 17-year-old climate activist Greta Thunberg said, the saddest thing is that this won't be breaking news. And it truly is sad. And meanwhile, Donald Trump and the entire Republican Party continue to deny that this is even an issue. I mean, they're literally saying, this is not an issue. It's a hoax. The global warming hoax. Why? Because they're taking money from a multi-billion-dollar fossil fuel industry and from a relatively small group of people who became billionaires in the fossil fuel business. At the head of that line, Charles Koch, but there's a whole bunch of others. And they've been funding the Republican Party and a few Democrats too, although most of the Democrats that were denying climate change are now long gone, funding these things for years and years and years. And these politicians who are taking money from these folks, they want to continue taking the cash. I mean, it's like a money laundering machine. Make money poisoning the planet, take some of that money, give it to politicians. The politicians get to stay in power to allow you to continue poisoning the planet and deny the fact that you're poisoning the planet at all. If this doesn't qualify as a crime against humanity, frankly, I don't know what does. We are looking at our planet becoming increasingly uninhabitable, at our children and grandchildren's future becoming increasingly bleak. And it is only being taken seriously by a handful of countries around the world. When the solutions are right in front of us. I mean, this is the essence of the Green New Deal, is we now have the technology between solar power, wind power, wave power, geothermal, biomass. With all of these systems now, we can produce energy that can power the planet, that can power a standard of life that we're used to. I mean, 20 years ago, the argument against anything like the Green New Deal, or even the argument against stopping burning fossil fuels was, well, you want to go back to live in teepees and clothing yourself with animal skins? Well, we don't have to do that. I mean, we didn't have to do that then, but now we definitely don't have to do that. You can generate electricity right now using solar and wind cheaper in most parts of the world than you can using fossil fuels. But the world continues to subsidize the fossil fuel industry to the tune of $3 trillion a year, $600 billion of that every year right here in the United States, coming out of your taxes, going right into the pockets of the fossil fuel billionaires. So it's time for us to wake up, and it's time for this to become, as Greta Thunberg said, breaking news that we are in a climate crisis. It is one that the fossil fuel industry knew was coming and has known was coming since the 70s, arguably even long before that. But certainly, I mean, you look at the internal documents from some of these companies in the 70s and 80s, they absolutely knew what was coming down the road. And instead of doing something about it, they started funding people with scientific credentials who were willing to lie to the public about the dangers in order to maintain their profits. This is a crime against humanity. And we need to wake people up, share the word, and get active on this thing. All of us, right now. Thank you. We'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day in just a moment. How do we most effectively push back against the rise of a new all-American version of fascism here in the United States that's called Trumpism? How do we push back?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. KG says, Tom, your constant drumbeat of negative news is hard to take for most people. How about some hope and good news once in a while? Well, thank you. The good news is we could solve the climate crisis tomorrow. We just need the political will to do it. And I think it's out there. I really do. And the other good news, the political good news, is that Donald Trump is polling at 42%. And every single Democratic candidate beats him. And beats him by substantial margins, at least right now. So, there's a lot we can do. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Tom, greetings to you.
Hi,
teacher.
Bob.
You teach me grace.
Thank you. What's up?
Ongoing, yes. I want to speak to the things you've been speaking to. The Death Star is a fear wagon. It's a fear wagon of despair and hate and delusionary unaccountability.
Mm-hmm.
The Death Star is a surveillance machine by the Federalist Society and the GOP agency. Fascism is a disease. It needs to be kept in mind that this is a disease. Fascism is a disease of mind and body, the overall body of democracy. And this disease creeps in as the false economies fail and accountability with authority denies democratic process. Exactly what's happening now, exactly what you're talking about. You described these monsters, or I should say this monster, this many-tentacled monster. I wish I had 10,000 hands. My goodness, we just can't be busy enough. But you're right. You've always been right and righteous to say despair is not an option. My mother used to say this. Bless her soul, she passed away here recently, and she was always fighting for what's right.
Yeah, I borrowed the phrase from Bernie. He used to say that on this show all the time.
Yeah, go Bernie, go, but I will vote for whoever the candidate becomes against Trump. As far as Bloomberg goes, Bloomberg. Maybe he can keep some issues in the light. I see him as a Perot factor. But it's always been a struggle, don't you think, to maintain any fact-based perceptions towards the future sustainability and regenerative eco-structures? I mean, we're building democracy slowly. This is a big setback.
No, actually, I think right now what's going on, Bob, is we're deconstructing democracy slowly, actually rapidly.
We are not. No, we aren't. There are some who are,
yes.
And there is a
yeah, we're trying to hang on to it.
Only a percentage, and it's not a majority of the people that support this clown and his. And I'll tell you what, the rapture people have a lot to answer for, because if they're going to create some magic bus to go to heaven in, they're going to have to be a lot more inclusive. Otherwise, they need to just get off the planet and let the sustainable people and the people who want to
you're
live.
talking a cult here, Bob. This is a cult that emerged in the late, with Mr. Rushdoony and his buddies back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and their unique interpretation of the Bible It had never been interpreted.
Well, yeah, and I've been seeing this all my life. When I was 4 years old, I saw President Kennedy get his head blown off, and I saw how sad people were. My dad was a social worker. He was a Quaker. He worked with people all his life. Citizenship is your boat to float. It's your canoe to paddle. It's your life to live. The best that you can choose.
There you go. Good rant, Bob. Good rant. Thanks a lot for the call. Bob's always good for a rant. We'll be right back. It's coming up on, well, it is 19 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Supporting the program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, let's see here. Oh, yeah. Let's pick up some of your phone calls. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I just wanted to drop some stuff on you. There's a story out now about a huge chunk of Pine Island Glacier that broke off. It's
that's the one I just referenced.
Washington. Well, yeah, Pine Island. I've been tracking Thwaites, okay, because they did a really good mapping survey of the ground underneath the ice. Mm-hmm. And Thwaites and Pine Island are up against a canyon. They're up against the deepest canyon on the earth. And there is no saving them now. But I want to highlight Pine Island because of the acceleration. If the western ice sheet goes, the sea level will rise 4 feet. That's just an empirical fact. All right. If the sea level rises 4 feet, you can kiss a lot of coastline goodbye. Okay. And I also wanted to mention this thing with Vindman in the Pentagon. That's where I retired from, is the Pentagon. This Vindman thing, I found out that Colonel Vindman is of Jewish ancestry. I found that out just reading an article. This is a Dreyfus affair. This is the setup. This is a Dreyfus affair. This is disgusting. Nothing like this should happen to a guy like Colonel Vindman. And also,
just a second, Dave. I don't think. Trump's son-in-law is Jewish, which doesn't make him an anti-Semite. But I don't think that it was his Judaism that drove Trump's hatred of him. I think it was the fact that he had the temerity to tell the truth.
Yeah, that's what happened to Alfred Dreyfus. The French were not necessarily anti-Semitic either, especially compared to their neighbors in Germany. Right. But I mean, Dreyfus being a Jew was a convenient scapegoat. He divulged classified information.
Although the French were. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in France, as there is all over the world. I mean, anti-Semitism is a subset of racism that continues to be a threat to the entire planet, not just the Jewish people, because it just tears us apart as a human race.
Well, this is the United States of America, Tom. We're supposed to have religious liberty. And also, as far as stopping fascism, there's only one chance now. There's only one chance. We need a candidate that can go, as people say, toe-to-toe with Trump. In other words, get in the muck and the mire and counter-insult him. But they also must articulate why 3 years of Trump is going to cause 30 years of decline and catastrophe in America.
Yeah.
They're going to have to articulate that, or people aren't going to listen, because Trump is using classic autocratic emotional cueing. You know, he's cueing people emotionally. And we've been basking in fear. We've been marinating in fear since 9/11 in this country. We're going to have to get brave.
Yep.
That's the only way to stop it.
Well said, Dave. Thank you very much. Paula in Miami. Hey, Paula, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. What's up?
I'm calling because I'm concerned about 2020, and I'm thinking back to 2018, and we've lost 2 governorships, one in Florida and one in Georgia, because of the purging.
That's correct.
We lost in Florida by 0.4%. And that could be just some purging.
It was just some purging, Paula. The only reason that you have Republican governors in any of these states that typically wobble back and forth by 1 or 2 points is because of voter purging. I document that very, very clearly in my new book on the war on voting. That's absolutely the case. And Stacey Abrams, in fact, there's a whole chapter in my book titled "Stacey Abrams Was Robbed."
And Florida, too. Florida was robbed, too, with Rick Scott shouldn't have never became senator.
Yep.
And the other question I had was, if more Democrats had showed up in 2018, why did we lose Senate seats when we won House seats? People vote down ticket. We should have picked up Senate seats.
Well,
and I'm afraid now. I'm sorry. I'm afraid for 2020 because they may decide to purge like a week before the election without giving people time to re-register.
Yeah, they need to fight the purge continuously. But Paula, you asked why did the Senate go the way it did in 2018? There's actually, each senator serves for 6 years, and so what they do is they stagger. 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years, and just coincidence of time and all this stuff going back 240 plus years is that in the last election cycle, the majority of the people in the Senate who were up for re-election were Democrats. This time around, I believe it's 23 Republicans are up for re-election. It might even be a larger number than that. But this year, the majority of the senators who are up for re-election are Republicans. And so
most of us show up to vote Democrat-wise. If more Democrats by millions show up more, we should be picking up seats.
You're absolutely right. That's my point. That is my point. And thank you very much. Very well said. Paula, thanks for the call. Sharon in San Francisco. Hey, Sharon. I'll be there, Wednesday night, I guess it is? No, that's Seattle. Whenever it is. I'll be there soon. It's at ThomHartmann.com. What's up? I'll be in Berkeley.
Good. Travel safe. I'm worried about William Barr interfering in all of those cases in New York and squashing
he shut down 6 investigations into Trump when he became Attorney General.
In New York, all of those?
No, these were all federal. There were 6 federal investigations into Donald Trump, and Bill Barr shut them down when he became AG. Sharon, my apologies. We hit a hard break here at the bottom of the hour. I missed the clock again. Normally I'm much better than that. My apologies. Call back anytime and we'll put you on the air. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after this break. Book on the Thom Hartmann Book Report today, or Book Club today, is Cuban Women Confront the Future. It's an interview with Vilma Espin. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question: what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Velma Espen: in Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, health care, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital expression of their human creativity, technology, technique, and inventions, would proceed apace, and all would participate with an uncontainable force in building the new society. The book, Cuban Women Confront the Future by Vilma Espin. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We have, I was just looking at BuzzFlash.com. Great news website run by my old buddy Mark Carlin out of Chicago. Buzz, who's spent much of his life as a gun rights as a protect you from guns activist. But BuzzFlash.com, great website, and their lead story, Banana Republic creeping fascism, Don Corleone Trump hijacks Department of Justice to help out his criminal cronies and punish truth tellers. But the second story is about how some Senate Democrats are now talking about impeaching Bill Barr if he won't leave. I mean, this guy has been covering up for Republican presidents since 1992. He covered up the Iran-Contra investigation. He covered up the Iraq weapons of mass destruction investigation. Those were back during the Reagan and Bush administrations. And now he has, he shut down 6 investigations into Donald Trump when he became Attorney General. I believe he shut down the Mueller investigation prematurely. We don't know if that's the case for sure, yes or no. I mean, there's still a huge debate about it. But Bill Barr, this is very, very problematic. I mean, this is a serious issue here, and so there are these appeals. The other appeal, though, that is out there, is to John Roberts, to the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Please do something, John Roberts. About Donald Trump going after Amy Berman Jackson, the judge in New York City, who Trump refers to as a Clinton judge. I believe Bill Clinton appointed her to the bench, and therefore she can't be fair, of course. She's the one who was in charge of the Manafort investigation, the Flynn investigation, and now the Roger Stone investigation, or trials. And so people are saying, well, John Roberts, save us from, the evil Donald Trump and save Amy Berman Jackson, Judge Jackson. Well, here's the thing you need to know about John Roberts. John Roberts worked in the Reagan administration. There's a whole chapter about John Roberts in the Reagan administration in my book about the hidden history of the Supreme Court and the betrayal of America. John Roberts went down to Florida in 2000 because he had clerked for the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, William Rehnquist. So he knew Rehnquist, and he knew how to make an argument that Rehnquist would pay attention to. He went down to Florida and helped George W. Bush's legal team when they were suing Al Gore and the state of Florida to stop the recount that the state of Florida's Supreme Court had ordered, because the Florida Constitution requires, or perhaps it was Florida law, but requires that if an election is within a half a point, that a recount is mandatory, and the state Supreme Court upheld that. And the U.S. Supreme Court blocked that. Clear violation of the 10th Amendment. But John Roberts helped the legal team to make that happen in 2000. And as a thank you very much to John Roberts for that, George W. Bush made him Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. From being just a lawyer who had worked for Reagan, moving from a lawyer into, hey, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. I am not holding my breath for John Roberts to save us. John Roberts was the guy who
who wrote the opinion that we no longer need Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which prevents southern states from closing polling places in black neighborhoods. We no longer need that because there's no more racism in America because it's 2013 and Barack Obama became president. And I'm not exaggerating or making that up. You can read the decision. So anyway, there's a lot going on, and but we have to save ourselves. It's not going to be John Roberts who's going to save us. Ivan in Bartlett, Illinois. Hey, Ivan, what's up?
Hey, thanks, Tom. This billionaire fraud, Bloomberg, is buying the election, buying the DNC, buying votes, buying endorsements by the talking heads.
And Trump is doing the same thing on the Republican side.
I know that, but I'm talking about Bloomberg.
Okay.
And I say, hell no. The last person I want to go against Trump is an oligarch Republican disguised as a Democrat. Don't be sucker Democrats. Reject Bloomberg and his money. Bernie, 2020.
Okay. And if you feel that way, don't vote for him. Absolutely. In a primary, I'm not going to be voting for Blue. Well, I don't know who I'm going to vote for. I shouldn't say I'm not going to vote for anybody, but in all probability, I will be voting for either Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren in the primary, in my opinion. Ricardo in Sacramento, California. Hey, Ricardo, what's up?
Hi there, Tom. I listen to you as much as I can, and I'm realizing that the theory on how we're going towards fascism with all this Trump stuff is really not in the news enough. I agree with your theory there, and my uncle fought in World War II to fight against fascism, and it's making a comeback here. And I think if it was in the news, if that word was in the news more often, I think people would, maybe a bell would go off,
Yeah, at least among older people.
Saying it.
Yeah. The problem with the word fascist is that, since Reagan stripped civics out of our public schools, most Americans don't know that fascism is a completely different thing than Nazism. And so when you say fascism, they hear Nazism. But that said, I opened this show with quotes from old Nazis, and they sure do sound timely. Excuse me. So, I'm not holding my breath for anything. Anyhow, thanks a lot for the call, Ricardo. Well said. Barbara in Honolulu. Hey, Barbara, what's up?
Oh, hi. I was wondering, you're aware of the tests that were run on the DeVolt voting machines by Princeton University and other sources?
Oh, sure. These voting machines are completely insecure. They're regularly hacked by 14-year-olds at DEF CON every year.
Exactly. Well, what I heard is that a lot of them were used in New Hampshire, and that might explain why Bernie all of a sudden dropped so many points. And I'm just wondering if anybody's looking into investigating this.
I don't know. I doubt it's the voting machines. I think it's more likely that 4 years ago he had only one opponent, and this time he had about 15. But he had 5 or 6 that were serious opponents. Number one, and number two, New Hampshire just put into place their new anti-student voter ID law that says that if you're a student in New Hampshire and you want to vote, and before now, if you lived in New Hampshire more than 6 months out of the year, you could call it your place of residence and you could vote. You didn't have to get a New Hampshire driver's license. You could simply, prove that you were at college there. They changed that law to say if you're going to vote, you have to sign a paper saying that within 60 days you will register your car in New Hampshire. You will become a New Hampshire citizen, essentially. And now, I have not seen a verification of this. I heard on MSNBC from a commentator that cut the student vote in half in New Hampshire. I've heard other people say that it didn't, so I don't know. But I think that if there is something that accounts for that, first of all, if it's a thing, I mean, it may just be that, he's going up against another progressive, Elizabeth Warren. He's going up against, Amy Klobuchar, who's gotten just lavish, loving television support from MSNBC for weeks now. He's going up against Joe Biden, who was a beloved vice president. He's going, there's and Pete Buttigieg, who's like a revolutionary character in as much as the first gay man to seriously be considered as a candidate for president of the United States. He was going up against quite a field. And so it shouldn't surprise us at all that he didn't get half the vote like he did last time, or actually last time he got a whole lot more than half the vote. So I'm not, I don't think that we need to drop ourselves into voting machine, fears, although the electronic voting machines are an abomination. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I got a quick comment and then a question for you.
Thank you, Mark. Get your mouth closer to the microphone, please.
How's this? Is this better?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. The comment is, as important as voting is, it's more important who counts them.
Yeah, that was Joe Stalin's famous quote.
Well, it's true. And then the question is if they do impeach Barr, how does that work? I mean, who steps in and runs it like the Attorney General would? If he's the one being investigated.
Well, it would be the Assistant Attorney General, and until the President appoints a new Attorney General, number one, and number two, the way that the impeachment works of a cabinet officer is the exact same way it works for the President. You hold hearings in the House of Representatives. The House, presumably the Judiciary Committee refers articles of impeachment to the full House. They vote on them. If he's impeached in the House, then it goes to the Senate for a trial. We just saw this whole movie. It would have to replay itself. And as much as I think Bill Barr has committed impeachable offenses that go all the way back to 1992, I don't see it happening. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a minute. Stick around. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jeff in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Thanks for taking my call, and I hope you're feeling better.
Thank you.
I called to talk healthcare in regards to the Las Vegas Culinary Union. Mm-hmm. But if I may, really quick, if you haven't read it yet, I really recommend an article from your old pal Lee Camp on Truth Dig from February 5th, titled "They're Going to Try and Steal California from Sanders Again." It's a good piece about the challenge independents are facing trying to vote in the California primary.
Okay, I'll check it out.
And really it'd be good to hear you amplify on it. But Tom, since Nevada votes before California, I did want to add something to the discussion you started yesterday about the Culinary Union. I was reading a piece by Megan Messerly in the Nevada Independent about that anti-Medicare for All flyer the union distributed. And let's be clear, Tom, as you and Mark Pocan said yesterday, any union negotiator with an ounce of credibility will tell you when you bargain for good health care, you're sacrificing wages, other benefits, and improved working conditions. So Medicare for All will get the monkey off all union members' backs in so many ways. But here's a takeaway from that piece in the Nevada Independent. That might be useful. It says that union flyer went much softer on Liz Warren's plan by specifically pointing out that she would allow a 3-year transition or a transition at the end of the collective bargaining agreement. So, Tom, by adding a small provision like that to his plan, Bernie might be able to mollify all the negativity coming from that union, and that is a huge union with a lot of influence in Nevada. What do you think?
I think it's a possibility, but I think it's too late.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, the flyers are out. The union has taken a position. They're digging their heels in. It's going to hurt Bernie in Nevada. We'll see where it goes. And Pete Buttigieg's, Medicare for anybody who wants it. Well, I think it's I don't want to go quite so far as to call it a scam, but it's close. Is popular. People, in America, I mean, we've spent the last 40 years selling choice as a good thing, right? With regard to abortion, the right to choose. And so when somebody comes along and says you should have the right to choose with your health care, that sounds good to low information voters, which is, the vast majority of American voters.
Yeah, it's a real bait and switch. But, it's so crazy because, even so-called Cadillac plans here in America, if you have, if you're lucky to have a plan that doesn't gouge you for deductibles and co-pays and premiums and all that, you still don't have the same peace of mind that people in all our Democratic allies, when they go to sleep at night, knowing they have if they get sick, if they need to go to the hospital, they're not going to be kicked out prematurely by an insurance company, or if they go in an emergency to an out-of-network hospital, they're not going to end up with tens of thousands of dollars in medical bills. So, I mean, it really, for a union to come out so strongly against Medicare for all is really egregious.
Yeah, no, and you see this with private health insurance. A dear friend of mine's wife has cancer right now, and this is the problem with these Medicare Advantage plans. The best hospital and the best doctors for the type of cancer she has is not in her network. And so
there you go.
Her insurance company will not pay for it. And he's looking at, can he come up with hundreds of thousands of dollars? And he probably can't. Jeff, thanks for the call. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Connie in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Connie, what's up? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Hi. I just wanted to give you a phone number. It's a comment line I found to call for William Barr.
Really?
And if everybody would call there and just...
I have my pen out. What's the number, Connie?
202...
Mm-hmm.
353 1555.
Okay. Have you called this number?
Oh yeah.
And what is it? When it gets answered, what is it? Is it a recording?
Yeah. Well, it asks you some different options. If you want to hear about other topics or whatever, and then the last one is to leave a comment.
Oh, okay. 202-353-1555. Great.
Right.
Connie, thank you very much.
I hope it does some good.
I do too. Thank you very much. Seth in Marion, Illinois. Hey, Seth, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. I was just wondering what your take on the Nevada caucus is going to be. Do you think it's going to turn out like Iowa?
I don't. No, I don't. No, it's not. It's not going to be it's not going to be all screwed up like Iowa was. They've said they're not going to use the app. So they're going to do paper ballots and figure stuff out and do it right. So I don't think that there's going to be a problem. The one thing that concerns me is that Elizabeth Warren, instead of going to Iowa, went straight to Virginia today, and she's going to be campaigning there. Now, part of that, I guess, is that she had to show up at the Senate, which is just down the road from Virginia, for a vote. But we'll see. The shaking out is happening, the winnowing is happening, and we're going to find out who our candidate is. I have a feeling within the next 4 weeks, but time will tell. But that's my sense of it. Seth, thanks for the call. Don in Evergreen, Colorado. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'm a member of the SSE, Society for Scientific Exploration. It's a group of kind of outside-the-box scientists who sometimes have trouble getting funding because they're outside the box.
Mm-hmm.
One of the guys at this year's convention had a proposal for a fleet of ships, like just 8 or 10, solar-powered. They would spray atomized seawater into the atmosphere using like inkjet technology.
Mm-hmm.
And that salt would increase the reflectivity of the atmosphere, reflects it as shortwave radiation instead of longwave, so it doesn't heat the atmosphere near as much, and it would at least buy us time to get off of fossil fuels.
It seems to me, Don, and I'm no expert in this field. I mean, if you wanted to discuss electronics, I could probably hold my own, or maybe even physics. But it seems to me that you have to get above the troposphere, don't you? Have to get into the stratosphere to have, for reflectivity to have any serious consequence. That's why when they talk about spraying zinc dioxide, for example, or zinc oxide, whatever the white form of zinc, or titanium dioxide is what it is. When they talk about spraying that into the upper atmosphere, when they talk about giant umbrellas, it's always low stratosphere rather than anywhere in the troposphere. If you got something coming off a ship, it's not going to get more than a few hundred feet into the air.
True, but they keep replenishing it. Where the stuff they spray in the high atmosphere, it's got to last for a while. Yeah. It's got to take.
And then what does it do? What does it do to the sea life underneath that depends on sunlight?
You're just recycling the salt water, the seawater, right back around. You're just taking seawater, atomizing it, creating these microfine salt particles like you have along the coast.
Right, but if that salt is reflective in the air when it's not reflective when it's in suspension or solution, then you're reducing the amount of sun. I mean, that's the whole point, right? You're reducing the amount of solar radiation that's reaching the surface of the ocean.
You're reflecting it back up as shortwave.
Right.
Or
what's that going to do to phytoplankton and stuff like that? I don't know. It's an interesting thought. Don, thank you for the call. Let me ponder that one. Michael in Princeton, Minnesota. Michael, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I was just watching the Senate here. They just passed the War Powers Act against Iran, 55 to 45. Now it goes to the House.
Whoa, that's great.
Yeah.
That means that Donald Trump can't declare a war as a strategy to suspend the election, which is what I've been worrying about.
Right, and also I think a lot of our Republican senators and stuff are kind of laying low. I think they know that individually they can't take on Trump, but what I'm thinking is going to happen here is that they're going to congregate, and once they do, I think they're going to go against Trump. And also, there's a lot of voters out there that didn't vote for Bernie or couldn't vote for Bernie, so they voted for Trump. We're going to gain those back.
I agree. And start looking at these Republican senators after their individual primaries are over. That's when they're going to be able to grow a spine.
And part of the reason I think this is because there was a survey on as far as the direction of the country taking. And the direction of the country was unfavorable by, I forget the exact figures, it was somewhere around 8%, though, unfavorable.
Yeah.
So, and I've been busy calling congressmen again, too.
You mean 8% more unfavorable than favorable? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Keep it up, Michael. Keep it up. The number and thank you for the call. The phone number for Congress for the Congressional Switchboard, 202-225-3121 or 224-3121. They both get you there. You'll find both numbers floating all over the internet. And let your senators know, especially if they're Republican senators, but Democratic senators too. Tell your Democratic senators to start using language like fascism, and tell your Republican senators to start standing up. Stop being a spineless jellyfish. And then you can also call your member of Congress, too, as well. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy doesn't just fall out of the sky. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag you're it. And tell your friends how to find progressive media. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Bye.